It's my pleasure to have my friend C.H. Hooks in town. I met C.H. when Wright and I were in a coffee shop. Wright Thompson and I were in a coffee shop in St. Augustine, Florida, 2 years back. And this guy said, "Hey, I think I know you people." And he was so friendly, so warm, and he showed us his St. Augustine. And that made a big difference in the television show we were making at that time, True South. That episode on St. Augustine got better when we got to know C.H. We found a good bar. We returned to the same coffee shop because we figured he knew some stuff. And on that trip, I started reading his first novel, Alligator Zoo Park Magic. And it is, there's magical realism afoot in that book. There's a love for St. Augustine and environs in that book. It reminded me of like my childhood. I grew up in Georgia. We would drive to Florida. My parents would never take me to Weeki Wachee, where the mermaids swam. Some people are nodding. They never took me to Weeki Wachee. I always wanted to go to Weeki Wachee. And that book reminded me of that childhood fascination with the kind of supernatural and with the animal world and with the world of magic. And there's magic afoot in this book, too. And it's really great to have you here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I'm sorry about Weeki Wachee.
It's okay. It's okay. I do feel denied, and maybe that can be fixed at some point. One of the things that Jude didn't say that I know is that this man also is a watercolorist, paints the sea creatures around his world, so he thinks in multiple ways about the world he inhabits. He also makes this really good hot sauce. Called Sea Witch that you can buy online. There's merch that goes along with Sea Witch as well. I can testify to the goodness of the hot sauce too. So I want to introduce him by way of a couple of, I'm just going to continue talking.
You do your thing.
It's a conversation. I was thinking about a way for me to introduce you beyond saying, like, I know this guy, I like this guy, I like his writing. There were two quotes that stuck out to me as I was reading this book. And in one, you're describing the son talking about his father in this book. And the father's like digging into his couch, you know, the way when you don't have enough money and maybe you're just out of college or maybe you're in high school or whatever, and you're digging, or maybe it's last week, and you're digging into your couch looking for quarters. C.H. describes this scene as saying that we raced each other on the change circuit. This book is about stock car racing, about dirt track racing, and I love that reference. He also, in the same way, thinking, you know, in your head about stock car racing, dirt track racing, he describes the engine being installed in a car. It drained oil and gas from its hoses, marking its territory. So again, that world of the animal world and our world crossing over. I think I'm through with my introduction.
Well, good stuff.
You want me to start with a question? Or you want to start with reading?
You know what? I think I'll read a little bit. I think I'll just do a couple. No, I'll save both of our voices. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the structure of the book. So, Can't Shake the Dust. I wrote this book 4 different times, which for a writer is a ginormous pain in the ass. But I wrote it in first person from the son's point of view. His name is Little in the story. And then I wrote it from the father's point of view, who goes by Wild. And these are all, of course, they're racing names, but were printed on your jacket or your car. And then I ended up writing it in third person to try and include all these points of view, but from a distance, and then realized that it had to be actually 3 different first-person points of view for this book. For a fiction writer, when you get to that point, you're basically feeling like you're living multiple personalities, which is not necessarily a positive thing. But at the same time, the book kind of necessitated that. I think that each of these characters kind of demanded these individual points of view. The third one is from the mother. And so I'm going to read you just a couple of short clips out of here. One from Chapter 1, which comes from Little, the son's point of view, and then a short piece from Chapter 2, which is Wild's point of view, the dad. So it's 3 generations of this Lemon family, too. I should probably preface this with that. You've got the grandfather, who racer who ends up losing a leg, and then the son. So here we go. And this is going to be from Little's point of view. This is after he has just gotten through another race of sitting on the track while everyone passes him because cars are running down. So they have to find something to eat because the father, Wild, has bet on him at the track and lost their money. So a familiar glow swelled in the distance. Even the fog couldn't keep its colors from permeating the night sky. My stomach growled because I had missed breakfast. There was no lunch. The groceries ran out on Thursday. The last meal I could remember had come from the school cafeteria. Could have been Thursday, too. Daddy pulled us into the Taco Bell parking lot and slinked into a parking space. A few spots down, 2 teens, maybe a couple years older than me, sat in lawn chairs in the back of an oversized truck bed. Another sat on the roof of the cab. I turned and looked the other way, pretended they weren't there. You getting a chalupa? I asked Daddy. Nah, that's the big money. Go for the dollar menu. Just give me a couple tacos. You got any money? I shook my head. You don't? I turned back to look at him. Through the window, I saw the boys out there looking at us. They were having a laugh. I felt some dread in my belly and tried to think it was hunger rolling around in there. I bet it on you. Daddy took his hat off and put it on the dash. He held his palms over his eyes and pushed till I imagined he saw some stars. What'd you do with that $15 I gave you? Daddy pulled his hair back, then put his hat back on. That was Monday. I got school lunch. What are you buying? Just a slice of pizza. It's $2. I gave him the truth. He held out his hands to his sides, weighing the justice of me having to defend eating. Daddy moved his lips, counted silently, but moved his fingers and came to a conclusion. You should have some left over then. There's taxes. There's taxes every time. I felt my eyes burning again, but the burn in my belly was way worse. I swear, man, check the seats. I pulled the handle and kicked the door. The cab light didn't come on. I dropped down to the asphalt below and felt into the seats, more than a little scared of what I might find. French fries. I found a lot of old French fries. You gonna eat these? I held a handful of fries up to Daddy to see. Or are you going to look too? I was trying to be funny. Maybe. I'm not real sure. Just felt like our luck was running out. That I wanted somebody between me and those boys over there on the other truck. They were standing up, trying to see what we were up to. Daddy opened his door and dropped down from the truck. We have got to get you a win. Look at there, it's Wild Bill Lemons, came the familiar refrain from the truck a few spaces away. Daddy heard the yell but didn't look. First, I need a car that can finish. Goes dead every time, I said, trying to look unfazed. Not your mechanic's fault. You flooded the engine tonight. Nerves on the line. We got to eat, I said. And don't I know it? Daddy got pissed, looked across the seats at me. I kept prodding under them. You think Senior would help us out? I looked up, not expecting to catch the glare Daddy showed me. Might as well have yanked on a dog's tail. Listen here, that man's no help, no how. Where are you getting that idea? Just thought with the car and all. I didn't get a chance to finish. Wild Bill Lemons! Look at this pair of lemons! The group in the other truck yelled and whooped. I looked up long enough to see through Daddy's door. They're doing the dance now, same as school. I pointed up from the floor, trying to avoid any obvious gesture. Daddy looked up from the seat cushion where his arm was still lodged deep. The boys in the other truck thrusted repeatedly toward Daddy and me. They held their crotches, and Daddy looked at their faces. They had their eyes and lips all scrunched into grimaces. I saw on Daddy's face the familiar look of pain and lifelong suffering, the same one I saw on my own face in the window of the truck when Daddy picked me up from school, or when I looked into the mirror. One of the boys had taken his pants down for the act. Daddy pulled his arm from the seat, stood, and leaned back against the side of the truck. Those are about the smallest lemons I have ever seen in my whole life, Daddy called. He pulled his own pants down, grabbed his manhood, and began dry humping toward those boys, his rear thumping against and denting the side of the truck as he bumped. I didn't expect it. Wasn't ready for all that, but Daddy must have had enough. Maybe it was the hunger, but it was a moment there in the Taco Bell parking lot. I thought I laughed a second, but then I didn't. The boys in the truck looked up at each other and stopped thrusting. The one pulled his pants back up. Hey, what's your last name? Daddy pointed to the now properly pant-wearing kid. The boy pointed to himself but didn't answer. "You look familiar," Daddy said. "Hey, you might be mine. What's your mama's name?" This part of the act was familiar. The boys folded their lawn chairs and got in the cab of the truck. The pickup reversed from its space, then peeled out. As it passed, the driver threw a can at Daddy. It missed, but scratched the side of the truck. "Come on, old man!" Daddy chased after him on foot, forgetting, for a moment, the absence of a leg. His gone leg buckled under the strain, and he caught the bed of our truck with his left hand. His body swung to a stop with his chin on the bumper. I walked around the back of the truck, and the boys swerved on the main road, screeching and cackling, a racing blacktop. I pulled Daddy under the arm and helped him to his foot. He strapped his prosthetic back in place. "We'll be all right. Got a loan to do tomorrow." I held up a dirt cake coin from the sea. "Got a quarter." "That's a start," Daddy said. So obviously, the situation is critical, pretty desperate, and wild and little. There's kind of a situation here of like who is actually raising who, and I think some of us end up dealing with this situation in life. That was a little bit longer than I thought it was going to be. All right. So this next section is really, really short, but I just want to give you an indication of what goes on in Wild's head. So, nobody cared about me trying. Folks said if there's 2 cars on the road, there's racing. I was racing an 8-week clock on a season that hadn't even started yet, before the flag even dropped. My own boy, Little, hadn't won a race yet, not even close. He chased the other cars around the track with the engine rattling a thrown rod, humping along like a heart ready to beat out. We chased bad money with good till there was nothing left to give but Nanny's house. Nothing would change that but a new engine. We didn't have the money for that, but my daddy did. Driving to his bar for another round of begging, the clock was ticking off colors toward a sunset, peeling and dropping them like the label off a dip can. I drove out past the concrete, bunker-looking strip malls with rows of for-lease signs, but for the big box spots in the Mexican restaurants. I passed Procreations, where Nanny worked. That was the big pet store with all the animals in it all stroked up on love. They sold dogs and cats and such in pairs, all hot and bothered and foaming, looking for a good time. I felt about the same. She used to bring home about a dog a month, but they'd always run off when food got scarce. Then she just started bringing home that blush wine instead. It was over there on the left when I drove out to see Senior. So were the folks with their signs, the ones Daddy had already milked for all their worth. These goons were always out there on the sidewalk of the last strip center on the way out of town. The tall one, long and thin, walked hunched under a plywood sign roped around his neck. Scribbled on the wood, "Your sin will find you out." I slowed down a little and squinted. Probably needed to slow down anyway. Another ticket and they'd be trying to take my license again. But I also slowed down because next to the words he had him a photo of a man taped on his sign. It was a picture of guess who? My daddy, Senior, from a newspaper or maybe his high school yearbook. All on the picture it said thief, thief, and thief. I wondered what he'd done, but I kept on driving. Everybody owed Daddy something, but they didn't have to like it. He liked to think I owed him too. A man couldn't owe somebody who'd never done a lick of good for him. Seeing the man straddled by his sign, his own doing, gave me a real empty feeling in my belly. I was hungry and had been for a while, ever since Nanny stopped coming around so much and the lawn doing dried up. Every time I tried to go into Procreations and see my fiancé, they got on the loudspeaker talking about Nanny Pet Pet, and everybody hid. I was probably squirming from the talk I was about to have with Senior too. Didn't even have enough wood to make me a sign for all my gripes. All right.
I had another question I was going to ask you to open, but I want you to talk about hunger. Listening to those 2 passages, there's hunger of all different sorts throughout that. And tell me, like, emotionally, experientially, why is hunger there? What's it about?
I feel like everybody in this book is hungry for something. So you nodded that. I feel like when I wrote this book, I was back, I keep bouncing back and forth across the Florida and Georgia line, but I was living in Brunswick, Georgia, which per capita is both the most impoverished city in the state of Georgia, but it is located within the most wealthy county in the state of Georgia per capita, because Glenn County is attached with all the Sea Islands.
With Jekyll Island, Sea
yeah,
Island.
Jekyll, Sea Island, yeah, St. Simon's. And so there's this giant juxtaposition between these two, really discrepancy between these two. You can drive down Gloucester, however you say it, in Brunswick. I'm still not sure. And you'll see tarps over houses where they're just kind of trying to keep the rain out. These houses are, patched together with plywood, and even on the street where we were living, which was not fancy, there was a house just really 3 houses away that seemed like, when I was writing this whole thing, that was the house that I kind of saw in my head. It was like this collection of stuff, but none of it was functional. It was all broken. And so that brokenness, that desire for something more than what you have, and then on top of that, a desire for some sort of intimacy or some sort of emotional resonance with the people around you that you're just not getting, coupled with the fact of literal hunger from not being able to get enough to eat, it all is in there, but it all kind of stems from, I think, that experience and that just day-to-day drive through there or walk through there.
This may be an awkward and a bad question to ask you, but have you been hungry before?
Certainly, yeah.
No, I mean in the big sense.
Yeah.
Where's my next food coming from?
Yeah. There was a time when my wife and I were much younger, where we just, I think most people, unless they're really, really fortunate, go through a time where you are young and you have very little or negative money in the bank, and you are just trying to figure out what's next. Ramen starts to taste pretty good. Rice starts to taste pretty good. My mom also grew up in that situation. She's from Shreveport originally, and
another hard scrabble town.
Yeah, and her parents were both Depression babies in Shreveport. Her dad lived in essentially a scrapyard is where his family was, and I don't think that there was always plenty, to say the least.
I'm curious. I grew up in Middle Georgia, so not that far from your stomping grounds, and dirt tracks were a big part of the environment. I didn't go. I'm the guy in the green cardigan. My mother didn't, my father didn't. It just wasn't a part of my life. But it was a part of the world around me. It was a given in my world. And I wonder, what's your relationship to dirt tracks?
So it's like a foundation or formative memory for me. We would always go to the fair every fall, and you would have a demolition derby with some races that were attached to that. And then
is that Brunswick or is that?
This is Albany, Georgia.
Okay,
actually, yeah, Southwest Georgia.
Yeah.
Because again, I've made the rounds through Georgia too. We were there for I think 12 years. And just the intensity of that, but then also the sport itself is a broken sport.
What do you mean?
Well, stuff breaks, and the way that people fix it, there are these collisions, and the way that people fix it is they truly take a sledgehammer to bodywork or to framework. They pound out anything that they can to just keep a tire from rubbing on a piece of the frame or on the actual cowling of the cars. But and then also I saw some races up in Wisconsin one summer, and exactly the same, which is really wild. A space that is very much Midwestern versus a space that's very much Southern. And the intensity of it, the feeling of it, the crowd is the same. there's no difference. Maybe a little temperature difference.
Yeah. And if somebody's racing in a small town dirt track, like, what are they racing for? What's
pride? Not a lot of money.
Right.
Some sort of, I mean, we see it today. I see it with my students. Everybody wants to be known for something. Everybody wants some piece of their identity to be associated with a pedestal. And I think that is very much that.
It reminds me, I've got a graduate student from the University of Georgia, just recently graduated. She's writing a book now about small town wrestling. It's a nonfiction book. And it is, it is respectful treatment of that subgenre, and she's trying to get at why people wrestle, why they take on personas, what it is they want out of that experience. That's very much what you're talking about.
Yeah. Oh man, I have a story about that, but we don't have to get into that tonight. But yeah, that's good stuff. That's a hard subject to tackle without falling into trick territory, and to be able to treat it respectfully. Yeah.
So when we talk about dirt tracks, we're talking about a South that many people would situate in the past. The South has changed. The South is less a dirt track kind of place now. And this book is not a book of country stores. It's a book of strip malls. I think Michael Farris Smith's book last time, his book was very much, it was about the strip mall South. Yeah. And these are country people in the strip mall South, and there's some inherent tension in that. Strip malls are everywhere in your book. The environment today, how does it factor in this book? How are you reading the South today and showing it to people in this book?
So, a huge part of this is, and I think back to the pride talk, right, about why are people doing this. I think that people in the South have seen so much of their industry disappear. I think people have seen, I drove through Albany, Georgia yesterday. I ended up taking that route up to Birmingham instead of going Atlanta and over, really in some ways to avoid traffic. But also, I ended up getting to stop through and have lunch with an old friend, and these towns are gutted in some ways. They're Firestone plants, and they're I think Miller has left too. Sometimes their marine bases are threatened. Anything that can be moved to a space with a larger population or more ability to get cheaper labor or whatever, it ends up being what destroys these towns and ends up leaving them with a lot of empty strip malls. Even some of the strip malls that I remember from being a kid in Albany this time have changed, and I could go back and kind of cycle through, well, what was that one? It was like a weird Walmart at one point, and now it's a Ross Dress for Less, and it was something else. And when I say that, I'm not knocking these stores. I mean, these are places that people go and shop because they're affordable, but it seems like everything's threatened with becoming a spirit Halloween. So.
But it's interesting because, I teach a class here in Writing Place, and I've talked to my students about any place can contain memories. The strip mall South can too.
Oh, yeah. I remember hiding in some clothing racks. I remember going to Sears on a Saturday, and now those are not there. And that's what you see in here too, is, even the Brunswick shopping mall is not really a mall anymore. Now it's like a space with a weird trinket booth, or like a church that has taken over Dillard's or something,
It was a really interesting space. I think about that great documentary. Have y'all seen the book about the closing of the Jasper Mall in Jasper, Alabama? Anybody else seen that documentary? I'm the only weirdo. You watched it. But it's a documentary about the closing of the mall in Jasper, Alabama. And what happens...
Wait, I have seen this.
Yes, of course you have, because you're my fellow weirdo.
Oh my God. That would be something that I would end up watching. But yes, I have seen that. And it interviews like the different people that work in that
who were displaced by that mall closing, who gathered there to play checkers or did brisk walking.
Exactly.
Like we have a mall here where people would walk in the winter because they could be inside. Like the spaces mattered in a really, in a non-traditional way. it makes me think about this idea of grit lit, the label applied to people writing from the South about working class folk. And you probably saw there was a Dwight Garner piece about grit lit and about Barry and Larry and Harry Cruz. And it quoted Tommy Franklin, who's there in the audience. I wrote down what Tommy said. Oh, good Lord. All right, I remember the quote. No, I remember it. The quote was, this is written from the perspective of the sensitive guy at the dog fight. Did I get that close to right? Yeah.
It's pretty solid.
Yeah, it is. And so I want to ask you about how you write about the sensitive guy at the dog fight, because I see you in that same tradition. You're not writing necessarily grit lit, you're writing strip mall South, not country store South, but the traditions, I hate that anymore. Anyway, the conversation's still going.
Yeah. I think it's really easy to dismiss the humanity of people. I think that it's very easy to make people a caricature of a person. It's easier to draw them that way, right? It's easier to write them that way. But the truth is that even the person that, you may get so flustered right now with seeing their political sign in their front yard, and it's really easy to kind of box that person into, a stereotype, but they still, on some level, have their humanity. They are still a person who has feelings outside of just political views or, the region in which they exist. There are things that they get upset about, emotionally sad about, happy about. They still have a grandkid somewhere that they want to see. They still have, something that is ticking. And so when you view it that way, it becomes much easier to write a character that I would argue has some complexity, instead of just, it's easy to dive into a caricature of a person. But
and so in this moment when it's hard to connect cross difference, in every kind of difference really, and you're talking about class now, you're talking about education, you're talking about, so are you writing into this moment? I mean, is that part of what you're doing?
If I did, I backed into it.
Okay.
It wasn't something that I set out to do. I didn't want to do the cop-out and try and write a book that I could avoid cell phone usage and date it back to the late 80s or early 90s or something like that. I wanted to write something that was of the moment, but existed in a South that is, it's the South that we see. Right. Yesterday driving through parts of Georgia and Alabama, it was fascinating. Back to the political sign conversation, I was shocked by how balanced it was. Right. The South, even in the rural parts that we often are dismissive of, and this was Georgia, Alabama, straight up through the heart of both of these states, is different. And people have complex opinions on these things, even if potentially they're misinformed on some things. So.
The act of, you spoke of this earlier, but the act of dehumanizing people who think differently than you dehumanizes you 100%. You lose too.
Yeah.
And writing is an act of empathy. And this book, it seems to me an act of empathy toward working class people, also toward maybe your younger self or some version of you, some younger. Yeah. So tell me. That's my last question, and then we'll open it up. But tell me how much. Forgive me, like you're blushing already.
I know.
I had developed great affection for this character, Little, the kid who's having in many ways almost manage his father. Not in many ways, is managing his father. This kid who's trying to win, trying to find love. It's a coming of age story, a really, really lovely one, and I care about this kid. And I have suspicions. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm not a dirt track racer.
Correct.
And thankfully, we were not impoverished on that level, for sure, as kids. but I think every fiction book that I write is on some level a reconciliation with an element of a past, right? My next one will be too. But this one, very much so, was a reconciliation with a kid at that age who really was probably unwanted by a lot of the people around them.
Somebody who was in school with you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I was the Methodist kid at the Catholic school, and I was there for 4 years, and I was pulled in there because I just kept getting my ass beat at my elementary school. So, I mean, over and over again. And so the pain and frustration of that is very real when you start writing. And if you don't have some level of emotion for the character that you're writing, then your writing's dead from the start. And I think, this is a bit of a reconciliation with that moment.
That's interesting to think about. You reconcile yourselves to others, but you also reconcile yourself to a moment.
Yeah. This is my confession. I wasn't allowed to go to confessions.
Yes. You're in the Catholic school, so I've asked a lot of questions. Now y'all have an opportunity if you have a question for CH. We'd love to hear it. He's not leaving. He already knew he was leaving. He's not leaving because he feels forced to ask for a question.
Maybe you're gonna call him.
Yeah, I'm not going to call him out. I have one more if we don't have one jumping, because I'll come back to it.
I'm sorry I've offended everyone.
You haven't offended anybody. So what did you idealistically, we talked about this some, but I want to hear a more full-throated version of it. Idealistically, when you set out to write this book, what did you want to do? What did you want to change in somebody's head when they read your book? What did you want to accomplish other than capturing characters that are believable? What ideas did you want to put in somebody's head?
Maybe this is the portion of myself that is maybe this is the competitive portion of that. Yeah. I didn't write it for anybody. I didn't think about anybody. I'm sorry, but whenever I sit down to write a book, I'm very much just in it to a fault. I'm not probably the most fun person to be around in that moment.
My wife just left today. Thank you.
But yeah, so I don't have like and I'm not sure that I feel any sense of accomplishment upon completion either. I think there was a time where I did, but I've written so many manuscripts at this point in life that when I finish one, it's more so about almost like immediately jumping to the next one. And it goes back to what we were talking about a few minutes ago, just about being busy and about kind of having another project.
So you like the process of the making of the thing?
I kind of like being able to live in that world for a little bit. I like getting to know these people on a level that I feel like I could walk out right now and potentially see one of them on the street. As creepy as that could be, but yeah.
All right, we have a question back here.
Tell us about your process. How long did it take you from getting to in on this book? And secondly, how hard was it to find a publisher? Or was it the same publisher as your previous book?
It was not. It was a different publisher. The process for me for writing a book is really intense and very fast. And so, just for the first draft, I feel like I need to emphasize
you said
that
you
point.
had multiple drafts.
Yes, yeah. Whenever I write a draft of a book, a first draft of a book, I write it really as fast as I can.
What does that mean? How fast?
6 weeks.
Longhand?
No. I type it. I have notes that I've collected for sure, and I will have an idea for scenes that I want to write into. But when I write that first draft, I am, come hell or high water, I'm going to get my words in every day. And the reason for this, it's not arbitrary. The reason for doing it that way is because I feel like if I don't do it in that window, then I'm going to lose the voice of a character. I feel like I have to do it in such a condensed time, because if I string it out, if I try and revisit it a few months later or something like that, and I haven't gotten the core of that novel out quickly, I'm almost never going to be able to recapture exactly how I feel like that person talks or feels or thinks or says something. And so, of course, you get into second drafts and third drafts of things, and you know, from the time that I started this book to the time of right now in this moment, it's about 6 years, because the drafts additionally after that take forever. Yeah. Good question. Thank you.
And the publisher, how was that?
Regal was wonderful. They're based in Raleigh. I think Publishers Weekly gave them Independent Publisher of the Year last year, and they've been great. Fantastic crew, detail-oriented all the way. For a smaller press, I guess it's been a great experience. It's not lost in the shuffle, if you will.
It's a great thing to hear. You don't hear that often.
Yeah, no, I know. My last publishing experience was different, so this one was quite good.
Another question? We're signed books. Yes,
Yes, sir.
How did you come to be a writer? Was that something you came to naturally? Were you in a career and wrestled with having that calling all your life, or where did that come from?
That is consistently one of the most difficult questions to answer, because I don't know of a moment. I just remember I've collected notebooks for decades now that I've written thoughts or lines or, you know, pieces of dialogue, setting descriptions, things like that. I have, you know, bins of these things now. Did they go anywhere? Probably not. But but at the same time, those are all building blocks to what you end up doing in writing a book. And I wrote a manuscript when it was probably 15 years ago, and what that was just going back through these notebooks. I realized I've been writing the same character over and over again. And I started collecting them the first time I lived in Savannah. I just started typing scenes. And I kept typing scenes, and I kept typing scenes, and it was unavoidable. It's like I fell into it. It was utterly inescapable. And eventually you end up with like 50,000 words or something of the same character, and you're like, well, I guess I got to do something with it now. I can't escape this. But at the same time, that was probably that moment where I was proud of accomplishing something. It was that moment where I felt like I'd taken something, I'd finally made something of these parts. And so I think that was for sure like a push toward this. And now it's, 15 years later and still doing it. And it's because you kind of have to. I can't, people ask why you write. It's not because I have this overarching desire to do this thing. It's more like a compulsion. But that's not the same for everybody. So I should say that as well. Like that, there's no right or wrong reason to write. And so please don't misinterpret it when I say it that way. That's just my reason.
We have time for one more question. Yes,
Growing up in the South and hearing stories, especially my family, Confederate soldiers and the lost cause myth and all that kind of stuff, I just sometimes think a lot of what we work out, maybe in a novel or what is dealing with our failure of losing the war, and it was us white males that did that or didn't do that. Is there any thinking in your own personal history or as you write? Was there anything about that in your characters?
I think that the brokenness of the American South stemming back to a really violent racial history and, of course, an economic turmoil for a century or so after that, absolutely plays into who we are. I think that I don't set out to reconcile that, and it's not something that I actively think about with regard to my characters, and certainly not in this book. But are we haunted by that as people? Do these things get passed down? Do we continue to cycle through frustrations and brokenness that stems from these things? Absolutely. We're going to be dealing with these things for a long time. There's a lot of brokenness that the American South has to, that can't even be reconciled. I mean, I feel like we could talk about this for quite some time, but do I love the American South? Do I hate the American South? Do I feel torn about it every day? Of course. I come from a family that's been in the American South for 300 and something years. It's inescapable that there wouldn't be some portion of my family that calls some of the pain on somebody else's family. And so, yeah, sure, we're dealing with it. Yeah.
Great question to end with. Oh,
Just 30 seconds to follow up on that. We're gonna change the Sea Witch. Tell us 30 seconds. Tell us Sea Witch.
Oh man! All right. So during COVID, my background is culinary. I went to culinary school. I love cooking. I love reading about cooking. I love food, obviously. Oh yeah. And so during COVID, I started growing peppers. All these different varieties of peppers. And in St. Augustine, we have datil peppers, which are kind of specific to the area, kind of Menorcan throwback. And then Scotch bonnets and, all these different things. And we had so many peppers that there was nothing else we could do. I wanted to make a hot sauce. Family from Louisiana, I wanted to do this decades ago. And I was like, you know what, now's the time. So I started making some sauces, and people liked them. We liked them. We started using them. We started giving it away because what do you do with all this? My children would come home from school choking because the whole house smelled like pepper spray. Yeah, we ended up with a company. Ended up is a very loose way of putting that. There's a lot of work on a lot of people's part, but it's just been a fun thing to do. It's taken us, all over the place. It's sold all over the country and some people around the world, but it's just a fun thing.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, the other commerce that's possible is buying this man's book. Hold up your book, damn it.